Welcome to the 12th episode of the Python tutorial series. In episode 6, we explored lists and how they can be used to store many different kinds of variables. If you haven't watched that video yet, you can access it by clicking on the box in the top right-hand corner of your screen now. In episode 6, we said that lists can store any kind of variable, and that lists are themselves variables. So, it's only logical that lists can contain other lists. This process is called nesting, and this is where the term nested lists comes from. Nested lists can come in many sizes. You can have lists of lists, for example, where the main list will contain a single set of sublists. Similarly, you can have lists of lists of lists, where the main list will contain a set of sublists, and each sublist, represented in yellow, will contain a set of sub-sublists, in this case represented in light blue. Let's now see an example of how to use nested lists. But first, if you haven't already done so, remember to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new episodes in this coding tutorial series. In this example, we're going to look at how to use a list of lists. In particular, our task is to multiply each element in the lines of a table by the index of that line. Now, as you can see, I've already written our nested list. It contains 4 lists with the elements 1 to 9. So the first row will be multiplied by the index of that row, which is 0. The second row will be multiplied by 1, the third row will be multiplied by 2, the fourth row will be multiplied by 3. So the first thing we have to do is apply our main for loop. So we will write for I in range len of our nested list. Now we have to isolate the row we're interested in. So we say row equals our nested list I. Then we have to iterate through the elements of the given row. So we can do that by saying for j in range len of row. We can now isolate the element by saying element equals row j. Now we have to multiply the element by the index of the row it is contained in, so by I. So we can say new element equals element times I. Finally, we can reassign the new element to our nested list. We can do this by saying our nested list ij equals new element. Now, as you can see, I've used a double index here. Why is that? Well, because the first index refers to the main list, and the second index refers to the elements inside each of the sublists. So if, for example, I was equal to 0 and j was also equal to 0, that would mean that we will be looking at the first element of the first list inside our main nested list. Finally, as always, in order to display the result correctly, we need to print it. In this case, we will print each row separately so that it is more easy to understand. So we can do that by saying for row in our nested list print row. Now that is our code complete. As usual, let's review it. We started by writing a list of lists where each sublist contains values from 1 to 9. Then we applied the main for loop that iterates through each of the sublists in our main list. We then isolated each row and iterated through the elements of that row. We isolated the element, multiplied it by the index of that row, and reassigned the new value to the element in that row. Finally, we printed our entire list row by row using a for loop. Now that we have reviewed our code, let's run it by clicking the F5 key on our keyboards. There you have it. As you can see, the first row is all zeros because every number multiplied by 0 is equal to 0. The second row is just 1 through 9 because we're multiplying all the elements by 1. The second row is again all the elements multiplied by 2, so 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, etc. And the third row is all our elements from 1 to 9 multiplied by 3, which is the index of the fourth row. So we have 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, etc. This is the correct result. So our code works. I hope you enjoyed learning about nested lists today, and I look forward to seeing you next week for a new episode of this tutorial series. In the meantime, if you have any questions, write them in the comments below. If you've missed any of the previous tutorials, you can find a link to the entire playlist in the video description or at the end of this video. Make sure, as usual, to like and share this video, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, and I look forward to seeing you next time.